Hello, today we're going to be going over part 2 of Gamepad methods. So we'll be going over some more in-depth functionality that the Gamepad class can offer. These are more advanced tips. So to begin with, to review, we have a class that when activated, it will just output a lot of data about the gamepad. So it'll give you X move, Y move, and rotation. It'll tell you whether the light is on and what the wheel speed is based on the trigger. So let's go over some more in-depth stuff. Say that we want the wheel speed to activate at a certain, say we want the wheel speed to be a certain speed every time, but we still want it to activate on the trigger. Now we could just have it on a button, so if right bumper, for example, but say we're dead set on the trigger. Well, that's fine, that's easy enough. Then what we can do is we can say wheels, we can change this, and we can go if current gamepad 1 dot right trigger is greater than whatever value you want. 0.2 is if it's pressed at all. Maybe you want it to be pressed all the way in, so then greater than 0.9. Then it will do wheel speed equals 0.6. Maybe that's the sweet spot or whatever. 0.6 is the sweet spot. But then if you run the code, you'll see that pressing it once will set it to 0.6 and then it'll never change. So what you need to do is then go over here and say else wheel speed equals 0. Perfect. So that's how to change the trigger, or even an analog stick you could do, to be a digital input method. So either it's on or it's off. That's how you go about doing that. So next what we're going to do is talk about stuff like an arm that has a certain position and you want to change it with the input method, with the gamepad, but you don't necessarily want to set it every time with the gamepad. So what we're going to do is we're going to go up here and add another double. Arm position, perfect. And then for this one, this is important. We're going to actually assign that a value earlier than the op mode loop. So we're going to say arm position equals 0 because that's the default. Then later in here, we are going to go telemetry.add data arm position. Arm position. Perfect. So this is how we're doing with telemetry. For an actual program, you might do servo.set, whatever the arm position is. But for our case, telemetry will do just fine. So if you run this code, you'll see that it'll show the arm position at 0 every time. But obviously we want to change that. So let's go up here and then say arm position change. That's in red because we haven't actually declared the variable yet. So let's declare arm position change. There we go. So now it's declared. Arm position change equals current gamepad 1 dot right stick Y, but we want it to be negative, so pressing up will increase it. So now we set the arm position change every time, but that doesn't actually do anything for the arm position itself. So we're going to do arm position plus equals. Remember, that means arm position equals arm position plus arm position change. And there we go. Now if you run the code, you'll see that pressing up should increase it and pressing down should decrease it. And if you press it up only a little bit, it'll go slower. But remember, servos have a lower and an upper bound. If it's over 1, then it's just going to stay at 1. If it's under 0, it's just going to stay at 0. So what we have to do is we have to manually fix that. Because say you're in a real coding scenario, say you're in a real competition scenario, what you could do is you could keep pressing up and it would keep going up and it would work just fine. But then if you wanted to lower, you'd have to wait the whole time you were pressing up. So I'm going to go if arm position is greater than 1, then arm position equals 1. And then if arm position is less than 0, then arm position equals 0. Perfect. So that way if it goes up or down, it won't change at all. So now if you run the code, you should see that arm position is increasing, but only up to 1. But it increases really fast. That means we won't have any level of precision with the arm. It's basically just all the way, there's nothing. So what we have to do is we have to make it increase a little slower. So what you can do over here, multiply this by a smaller value. So multiply that by 0.05, for example, 0.05 times. And that means that it'll only go up, if you push the right stick up all the way, it'll increase by 0.05. Even that maybe and probably is a little bit too fast. So you can tweak that value to whatever you want. But that's why it's helpful to set it as a variable first, because then you can tweak it before and then you can use that variable later. You only have to tweak once. So now that we're done with that, let's go ahead and talk about, I forget the word, rising edge indicators. So the light, let's go back to the light. Notice how if you want the light to be on, you have to hold Gamepad A. That's super annoying, and you don't want to do that in a competition. You want to just press a button, just like flicking a switch, and then keep it on. So let's go ahead and do the most. Think about how you would go about it. Think about how you go about it. I'm going to go the most basic way, and then I'll show you. Okay, ready? Perfect. So we'll just go ahead and go if current gamepad 1.a, then if light on, so that's if the light is on, then light on equals false. And then else, so that means if the light on is false, then we set the light on to true. Perfect. So that's all well and good. Start the program, press A, and see what happens, because it's not good. Because what'll happen is it'll sense the A every single time it updates, which is many, many times per second. So it'll keep going on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off. You don't want that. You want to be able to just press it once and then take your finger off, and then it will work. So the way to fix that is to detect whether the A button was just pressed. You don't want to detect whether the A button is being pressed. What you want to find out is whether someone started pressing the A button. We don't care about whether someone is pressing it right now. We just care about whether they just started it. So how do we do that? That's right. We go back to previous gamepad 1. That's why it's important. So we just go and, which is 2 ampersands, if current gamepad 1.a, and not, which is exclamation point, not current, previous gamepad 1.a. So if current gamepad 1, the A is down, and not, so remember, previous gamepad up here, we have not set previous gamepad at all yet. So we'll get back to that. I'll explain that in a second. So we want to sense whether someone just pressed it. So what do we set previous gamepad to be so that that works? Well, what we do is up here, right up here at the start, we do previous gamepad 1.copy gamepad, because we can't let it go through any loops with previous gamepad 1 not being assigned a gamepad value. So we have to assign it first, but we're not going to do that for long. Now, once the actual loop starts, we set previous gamepad 1.copy current gamepad 1. So the way that it works is that at the start of every loop, it will first, previous gamepad will say, okay, what's current gamepad 1? I'm going to copy that. Then the current gamepad will update to be whatever gamepad 1 is. So previous gamepad is always the last loop's gamepad. So if the A button is not pressed, then whatever, then I press it, then previous gamepad 1, A button is still not pressed, but current gamepad 1, it is pressed. So down here, current gamepad 1.a and not previous gamepad 1.a, then this should work. If you instead want a falling edge indicator, which means that you detect when the button is released, then, oh, I don't know what I did. Then you just change that not and you put it on current gamepad. So if not current gamepad 1.a, but previous gamepad 1.a. So if you try this code, you'll see that when you press the A button, nothing happens. When you release, then the light should change from on to off. Then, as promised in the first video, I'm going to go over enumerators and switches. So an enumerator is sort of like a class and sort of like a variable. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to say enum mode. And now I do brackets, and I can do whatever names I want. So this is a variable type that I'm creating, and I'm defining whatever the data are. So I'm going to say the options are friendly, sentry, and kill. Very apropos options for a robot. So we've defined our enumerator and the possible data entries it could be. That's a little bit like an integer where the data can be 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. But within enumerator, it can be any of these. So now I'm going to say mode. So now I'm defining a variable called lowercase m mode. So that one we can actually edit. So to start with, by default, we're going to set mode equals mode capital M dot friendly. So by default, the robot's friendly. Perfect. But say we want to change that. Then what we can do is we can go down here to, let's just go down here. If current gamepad 1 dot B and not previous gamepad 1 dot B, then we're going to do something called switch. So switch is a little like an if statement, but there's as many inputs as we want. So switch mode, it will take whatever we set the mode to, and then we do cases. So case friendly. If it's friendly, then what will happen is, let's say it just cycles through. So mode equals mode dot sentry, and then we're going to go ahead and go break. And break is important so it doesn't keep going through the thing. As soon as we press break, it leaves the switch and goes to the next thing. And then we can go case sentry, mode equals mode dot kill, and then break. And then we can do case kill, mode equals mode dot friendly, and then break. Perfect. There's also something called default. So if you do default, then whatever happens after this will happen by default. So if say you have an integer and you expect the common values will be 0, 1, or 2. So if it's any of those, you do something. But if it's like 3 or 4 or 5, you do something instead. That is what default is. Because there's only these 3 options, we don't need a default for this one. So now I'm just going to go ahead and go telemetry.add data, mode. So this should be everything. All you need to know about gamepads that I used last year anyway. This same stuff applies for Gamepad 2. I'll go more in depth when I go over the class about, what's it called? The teleop class. I'll go more in depth with that. But there were certain modes that you could switch to that would change around some of these inputs. So like the arm position would change based on what mode it was in, etc., etc., etc. You get the picture. Basically, this is all I need to know about gamepads for now. If you need anything else, just text me or look it up. Thank you. Good luck and happy coding.